Now, welcoming in the man, the myth, the legend, national recruiting analyst for us here at On3 to break down the recruitment of the top quarterback in the 2024 cycle, Dylan Raiola. Please welcome the man, Josh Newberg. Josh, how we living, my guy?
I'm great, JD. Glad to be here. Good morning to you as well.
Glad to have you a part of this, man. Now, news was broken over the weekend. Dylan Raiola ends up during the dead period at a Nebraska basketball game, and the crowd went crazy, as you would expect. What do you make of his, I don't know if secret is the right word, not secret visit, but a unannounced visit to Lincoln, Nebraska? How much should you read into this if you're a college football fan in general to where Nebraska stands?
Well, I think if you were a Nebraska fan prior to this weekend, you were probably hedging your bets. Like you didn't want to go all in this early on a recruitment like Dylan Raiola, because everybody knows how emotional recruiting is. And it's just February, right? So Nebraska fans were probably thinking like, it'd be great to land the number one QB, the number one prospect in America, but you know we're coming off some hard times. Well, you look a little deeper, you see the family connections, you see that he's a legacy recruit, and then you get the news that Dylan Raiola, during the dead period, is going to make a visit to the basketball game. He shows up, they chant his name. Do you think, JD, if Dylan Raiola shows up to a UGA basketball game, do they chant his name at a Georgia basketball game?
I don't
Georgia
know
has
that.
a lot of 5-stars come through that place.
That's very true. I don't know that they would, but I would just say this. They build them different in Lincoln, Nebraska. Like the fan base in Lincoln, Nebraska is a whole other beast. They've been selling out for how many years, Josh?
Forever.
And, I mean, forever it feels like. So to answer your question, I don't know,
Regardless.
but it can't hurt that Nebraska did.
So you see him show up, you see his name chanted, and if you're a Nebraska fan, after this weekend, you got to be all in now. You're all in on Nebraska has a shot to land the number one player in America, Dylan Raiola. And he's a quarterback, somebody that can come in and make an instant impact and, you know, kind of change the course of history right now in terms of where the Nebraska program's headed.
And I think you said that perfectly, Josh. I want to talk about that really quickly, folks. If you haven't yet subscribed, make sure you're locked in. Content from Josh Newberg on The Inside Scoop. Content from us here at The Hard Count every single day. Don't want you to miss any of that. But Josh, you said it perfectly. If you're Dylan Raiola, you can go to Georgia, you can go to USC, and we'll talk about those programs in a minute. But the pitch for Nebraska is, hey, Dylan, come here and get us back to prominence. Be the catalyst for change. How appealing is that? Or rather, what is the pitch outside of that for Nebraska in your mind for Dylan Raiola?
Nebraska's in a unique position. Of all the teams recruiting him, they're the one team that can really pull at his heartstrings and make it an emotional play for Dylan Raiola. He's a legacy. Like you look at USC. What's the pitch with USC? It's development. It's going to play for Lincoln Riley. It's a business decision. Hey, if you're Dylan Raiola, maybe you see yourself holding up the Heisman Trophy and that's everything you wanted. If so, you know, Lincoln Riley and USC provide an opportunity to do that. You look at Georgia. What's their sell? You're going there to win football games. You're going there, and the expectation is to not only make the playoffs, but compete for a national championship year in, year out. You're carrying the torch at Georgia of the next great quarterback to come through there. Whereas at Nebraska, it's just a different sell. Like I said, he's a legacy prospect. Family's involved. They have more access to him. Why was Dylan Raiola able to go to Nebraska during the dead period? Because the NCAA says if you have a prior relationship with somebody, the rules are off. So for Dylan, his uncle Donovan Raiola is the offensive line coach at Nebraska. Therefore, he has that prior relationship. He can go on campus. Now, he can't meet with Matt Rule and the rest of the coaching staff. But that experience that he had at the basketball game was probably more than he expected to have at a basketball game for Nebraska. So seeing him show up there, it shows that Nebraska is going to be in this. They have access to him that other teams don't necessarily have, and they're in the running.
And it's tough, Josh, because we don't want to read too much into this. Like, we don't want to overemphasize the fact that he was at Nebraska. But like you said, there's so many pieces that fit into the puzzle for Dylan Raiola to Nebraska. It's hard not to think, okay, where do they sit in this whole thing? The RPM right now has UGA as the leader with 32%, Nebraska right behind him at 28%, and Georgia at 24%. So to be real, if we're reading the tea leaves there with the RPM, it's more or less all three of those schools neck and neck. And to think if you're Dylan Raiola and you show up and 16,000 plus people are chanting your name at a basketball game, like he hashtagged it perfectly on his Twitter page, hashtag the good life. Like he was living his best life, the good life in Lincoln, Nebraska this past weekend.
Yeah, and it's not going to stop. I mean, they're going to continue to play up the relationships, the emotions. And originally, I kind of slept on Nebraska. I'm not going to lie. I was sleeping on Nebraska when he decommitted from Ohio State back in December. I really thought Georgia and USC were going to be a two-team battle. And yes, I felt like we were going to have to mention Nebraska throughout his recruitment because it's valid. But now I think Nebraska's going toe-to-toe right now with Georgia and USC for Dylan Raiola.
I mean, that's the way the RPM sees it. And when you talk about tracking the visits, because you and I talk about that a lot, and that's something that you have told me, especially during signing day, like, hey, track these visits, track them. They're not going to lie to you. Men lie, women lie, visits don't lie. He will have a visit, it sounds like, unofficially back to Athens. That would be his 6th unofficial visit to the Dogs. That would make 6 for Nebraska and 6 for Georgia being the top 2. Where do you see USC factoring in here? Because USC is the closest proximity with him being in Phoenix, Arizona. Do you expect USC to be in the mix here in terms of getting more unofficial visits? I would imagine he spent a fair amount of time there growing up. I mean, where does USC fit in this whole mix for you, Josh?
USC did a phenomenal job back in January when they were able to get Raiola and his family on campus for a visit over a weekend. I think that firmly put him in place to be in this recruitment down the stretch. Like you said, he's going to visit Athens. I do expect him to be back in Lincoln, Nebraska in March, and I think he ends up taking a visit to USC in March as well. So that kind of lines it up, right? I mean, if you kind of follow the visits. So if you're tracking what's happening, he went and took visits to all 3 schools already. The dead period gets going, the dead period ends on March 1st and visits reopen. I think he's going to visit all 3 of these schools in March, which leads me to believe that an April decision is not out of the picture. Mm-hmm. I think that Dylan Raiola could come off the board in April.
And even the good people at Husker Online are saying, hey, there's still a Georgia visit that is likely going to happen in March. Correct, Josh?
Yes.
Okay, great. I want to make sure we're on the same page there. But you said this, too, when we were talking in the office. Dylan Raiola is a pretty crucial domino in this 2024 cycle. If Dylan Raiola were to commit in the somewhat near future, which I think just about everybody across the industry expects that to happen at least before his senior season is what the thought is, what impact would that have on the 2024 cycle, Josh?
We played a little QB dominoes on the Inside Scoop yesterday, and what I found was 11 of the top 20 quarterbacks right now are uncommitted. So just over half of the top 20 quarterbacks in the country are uncommitted, and everybody knows quarterbacks come off the board early. If not by the start of their senior season, definitely in the summer and sometimes in the spring. And right now, we're seeing a bit of posturing, I think, at the quarterback position. And one of the reasons why, I believe that Dylan Raiola kind of holds the cards to how and when these dominoes will fall. I think if Dylan Raiola came out on March 3rd and made his decision and announced where he was going to school, I think we would see 4, 5, 6 other quarterbacks come off the board in the next 3 or 4 weeks. Now, Dylan Raiola is not going to do that. Therefore, I think we're going to see these quarterbacks kind of stay where they're at. And if Raiola does make an April or even early May decision, I think we'll see a good bit of the top 20, maybe 75%, committed sometime by the start of summer or early summer. And I think that the reason why is they're waiting to see what Dylan Raiola does.
It's hard to blame him. It's very hard to blame him with how talented he is. Again, the top quarterback in the 2024 class. Charles Power loves the way that he can throw off platforms, says he has advanced arm talent for where he is currently at the high school level. I want to ask you this question, Josh, before we get you out of here, and appreciate all your time. USC has Malachi Nelson, and Lincoln Riley's a quarterback whisperer. Georgia's got a stocked quarterback room. How much pressure is on Nebraska to land the top quarterback in this 24 class in Dylan Raiola?
Man, JD, they need to hire you on staff because you are hitting some recruiting bullet points that the Nebraska staff better bring to that in-home visit with Dylan Raiola. I mean, you're right. Opportunity of playing time. There's a clear path there at Nebraska, whereas at Georgia or USC, yeah, they take great quarterbacks year in, year out. So I do believe that that's yet another selling point that the Nebraska staff is going to use when recruiting Dylan Raiola.
It's going to be fascinating to watch this whole thing unfold. Nebraska's putting on the full court press, no pun intended, with the basketball game, but Nebraska, it sounds like, according to the RPM, very much in this, right behind Georgia, with USC at third place, according to the RPM right now at on3.com. Well, Josh, appreciate your time. Folks, if you haven't yet, give Josh a follow on Twitter and make sure you watch the Inside Scoop on the On3 YouTube channel. Tons of in-depth recruiting analysis from Josh as he brings on other experts from the On3 network. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.